On the 19th of January 1997, in St Helens, near Liverpool, Philip Fraser murdered his ex-partner, Catherine Scaife. Their eldest daughter, Sonia, witnessed the immediate aftermath.
My dad didn't really care about me and my sisters. He only wanted my mum. He was in love with my mother, and when my mother didn't reciprocate, he killed her.
For children that witness serious crime, for children who have walked into scenes where parents have been murdered, what we do know is the impact of that is very far-reaching. We expect serious post-trauma. So it's not just in the moment that it's horrifying. You're talking about years and years, and actually sometimes a lifetime of traumatic recollections.
Upon release from prison in 2010, the abusive and controlling Fraser would also take the life of another young woman, Donna Forrest, in scenes terrifyingly similar to his first murder.
When you look at all the circumstances surrounding these two horrific homicides, they were the work of a psychopath. I think with all the tendencies that he showed, he would probably have gone on to murder other people. This was just pure evil.
For the family left behind, his actions tore their lives apart.
When you think about murder, your thoughts are automatically with the victim. But the reality is that there are many victims in murder. Imagine knowing that you are related to the killer and the victim, the devastation and the confusion that ensues. And the reality is that that kind of damage, that can take a lifetime to heal. And actually sometimes it is completely irreparable.
When he murdered my mother, I hated him. I just hated him because I loved him. He hurt me. He hurt my sisters. He took our mother from us. What he did, he's worse than an animal. He's a monster.
Philip Fraser met Catherine Scaife in 1983. They married 2 years later and had 3 children together. The relationship, however, was dominated by abuse.
Domestic abuse is a very complex area. It involves a power dynamic, but the way that plays out is different in every relationship. But nonetheless, it all comes down to this one element. It's the fact that one partner seeks to dominate, control, and essentially imprison within the relationship the other partner.
It's a sad, sorry event that people abuse their partners. But unfortunately, in my experience, you're only one step away from a homicide. And in saying that, what it means is that all domestic violence is just that one step away.
Born in 1985, Sonia was Catherine and Philip's
eldest, but couldn't live without one another relationship. As far as I know, they were on and off. I know they kept splitting up. My father used to end up in jail almost every weekend after hitting my mum or battering my mum.
Philip Fraser has a history of violence, and in relation to psychopathy, the act of being a psychopath would manifest it in several ways, all of which Philip Fraser actually shows. He would have had a lack of remorse and lack of guilt. He would have been a pathological liar. He'd be emotionally juvenile, emotionally unstable, unable to form proper relationships without him being in control.
By Christmas 1996, he had moved into a bed and breakfast. And then I think he actually thought that my mum and him were going to get back together. But my mum wasn't having it. She said, no, we don't work as a couple. We can remain friends. We should remain friends anyway for the girls, because you're their father and they want a relationship with you. And then my mum met Frank, this amazing man who worked in a carnival. I mean, he was amazing. He was so good to my mum, and he was so good for my mum too. On the 19th of January 1997, we were supposed to have a day out with our father. She arranged for my father to come to take us out for the day, me and my sisters. And it was around midday, and he came down and he asked me if we all wanted to go to the park. At first, I didn't want to go anywhere. I didn't actually really want to go. I didn't want to be around my father. But anyway, just to keep my sisters happy, I asked if we could take our babysitter with us. So I went round to the babysitters and asked if he would come with us as well. And while he was getting ready, I was just walking back from his flat. I heard this awful, awful scream. And then my sisters ran up to me and they said, I think that was Mum. And it hinged into my head that maybe that was Mum. So I ran into the house and my father was over the table on top of my mother's boyfriend at the time, Frank, and was trying to stab him, but Frank managed to get the blade between his hands and he snapped the blade. And I shouted what was going on, like, what have you done to my mum? And my father jumped up, I think he seen me, and he ran out the door. And Frank, he didn't want me to come in further into the kitchen. He asked me to go out and get an ambulance. So I turned to my sisters and I said, go and get the neighbours to get an ambulance. And I went into the kitchen. Frank told me, he goes, no, I don't want you seeing this. I goes, no, I want to see my mum. I want to see what's happened to my mum. And my mum was lying on the kitchen floor in a pool of blood. My father had stabbed her. I don't know exactly how many times he stabbed her, but I know that it was a lot. So I ran out the door, I ran to the neighbours and I said, call an ambulance, my mum's dead.
Catherine was stabbed multiple times and pronounced dead in hospital. She was 29 years old. Philip Fraser was arrested shortly afterwards. Sonia was just 11 years old.
The reason that Philip murders Catherine is because finally he realises he has no control left. There is nothing more triggering for a perpetrator, nothing more triggering than realising you no longer have power, because that's the only thing you've ever operated with. And that's why he kills her.
Certainly Catherine having a new boyfriend would also have been one of the triggers that precipitated being murdered, that would have meant he wanted to gain control of the relationship and control of her, and if that meant murdering her, then so be it. The fact that he murdered Catherine and left the children without their mother wouldn't have had any effect on him whatsoever.
We had the funeral and I got to say my goodbyes to my mum. I got to kiss her on the forehead the day before she got buried. And after the funeral, it wasn't really talked much about after that.
The problem with silence in families where people feel so uneasy with the truth that they just decide it's best not to bring it up, it's really problematic for those immediately affected. The catharsis of speaking your truth, of connecting with family members who remember the people that you've lost, that's really helpful in dealing with the traumatic grief process. If you don't have an outlet for that, you have to find an outlet somewhere. And usually, without guidance, without support, without help, you will find that in very negative avenues.
Sonia and her sisters went to live with her mother's parents in the Highlands.
At first, I didn't really want to go to school at first because it was so quick after losing my mum. I mean, it was like a week after my mum had passed that we were put into school. And I didn't want to go to school because I was still grieving, I was still angry. And I got into a bit of trouble in school. And back then when I got angry, I just blacked out. I couldn't control myself. I keep it under control now. But back then, I couldn't control my temper. And I used to worry that it used to come from my father. That I was exactly like my father.
The fact that Sonia's behaviour starts to disintegrate, that's completely normal because she actually is incredibly angry with the world. The one thing that mattered to her has been taken away. The fact that she's blacking out, now that's serious. That would indicate some really severe post-trauma. So severe that her mind is literally shutting down. And the truth is, unless you get some really, really intensive help, some really professional support there, you are going to struggle forever.
In October 1997, Philip Fraser faced trial for the murder of Catherine Scaife. He pleaded guilty and was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 8 years. Upon appeal, he was ordered to serve a minimum of 11 years for her murder.
I don't think Philip's confession can be taken as a sincere act of remorse. He simply didn't have any other choice. Men's fatal violence against their partners and ex-partners is often described as a loss of control, but I think it's the opposite. It's actually a last final act of control.
Struggling to cope with her loss and grief as a young teenager, Sonia's behaviour became difficult for her grandparents to deal with.
At the time I was pretty wild. I was running away all the time. I ran away from my grannies when I was living with my grandparents. I ran away from them a couple of times.
Sonia then went to live with her mother's family, and it marked a new chapter in her life.
I moved in with my Auntie Debbie and my Uncle Andrew and my 5 cousins. They were great. And my Auntie Debbie just turned around one day, she goes, just write to him, get his side of the story. Because she said herself that she didn't believe that he did it. He actually intended to kill my mother. She thought that my mother might have said something to him, and he's just picked up the knife out of anger and stabbed her. So I wrote to my father to ask him what happened that day. I got a letter back, and he had told me that my mother told him that, because they were arguing, and that, like, she goes, oh, you might as well just leave, because Sonia doesn't want to go anywhere with you anyway. And my sisters, they're not even your children. So that's when he got angry, and because he'd been drinking that day, he got angry, he picked up the knife. And I believed him. I was so stupid to believe him.
Sonia's father is such an astute manipulator that not only does he manage to re-engage with his daughter, he actually manages to convince her that somehow he's innocent, in spite of all the history that she's had with him. That's how powerful he is. That's how coercive he is. And it's also how fragile she is.
I didn't realise what kind of man he was. I just wanted to be eaten. I didn't have my mum, so the only person I had left was my dad.
In St Helens in 1997, Philip Fraser had brutally stabbed his ex-partner Catherine to death. The murder was the end of what had been a violent relationship that had begun 13 years earlier, when Catherine was just 15 years old. Their eldest daughter Sonia was born almost 2 years after their relationship began.
My mum was 17. She was just about to turn 18 when I was born. She didn't really tell me much about meeting my father, but she was mad for my father. She absolutely loved him. I worshipped the ground that he walked on. That's how much she loved him. I think my grandparents actually saw right through my father. I don't think, because he was a lot older than my mum. Well, when she was a teenager, I think there was 6, maybe 7 years between them. So my grandparents weren't happy about the relationship, especially when she got married at 17. She went against her family, her mother and her father, just to be with my dad.
An abuser tends not to be an abuser when a person meets them. An abuser tends to just seem like a box-standard individual who often is quite charismatic. So by the time the first impact occurs, you're already in love with that person. So when you think about being in love with someone, it often follows that when they make a mistake, you'll forgive them. And that's how the cycle begins.
People like Philip Fraser are very complex, but the reason for the abuse really comes down to looking at their background. And it may well be that that's as a result of his upbringing, that he was subject to abuse and violence when he was younger, and he's actually replicating that.
When Sonia was 2 years old, Catherine left the abusive relationship and divorced Philip. However, she soon returned and the violence resumed.
I can remember my 4th birthday party. The dress that my mum got me was a beautiful princessy dress. I can remember it being a really, really happy day. My father coming in drunk at the end of it. I can remember him locking my mum out the house and then leaving us. I can remember my mum getting taken into hospital a couple of times because he'd beaten her up that bad. I had to look after my sisters as well, protect them. I would take my father's anger, would let him take his anger out on me so that my sisters wouldn't get hurt.
The abuse of Catherine's children would have been part of that controlling aspect that Philip was showing, of actually being in charge and having that control over the whole family.
So when you live in a violent household, you never feel safe, you never feel secure. And when you actually think about what a home and what a family is meant to stand for, it's security and it's safety.
Probably at a very, very young age, I understood that alcohol played a lot into what was going on with my father. I didn't like him when he was drinking spirits. It was okay if it was just a couple of beers, but when he was drinking spirits, you could tell he'd get really, really scary, really, really angry, very aggressive, very quick. And it would go on for the whole night. He'd be arguing, fighting with my mum. I'd hear my mum screaming. I'd hear her banging off the walls, off the floor.
We can statistically evidence that alcohol plays a big part in abuse. It really does. Because, one, it lowers the inhibitions of the individual drinking alcohol, and secondly, people get angry very, very quickly. If that's their go-to feeling, when you have alcohol, anything that you do will enrage that person, and that's the excuse they're looking for. So it gives them an opportunity to play out a behaviour that suits them, and that's what happens in abusive relationships.
In 1992, when Sonia was 6 years old, her mother Catherine left Philip Fraser again after his violent behaviour became even more extreme.
My mum was supposed to have had an affair, and this is what my dad had in his head. So my father, he stole a shotgun and went after my mum, but he got caught. And that was the night that my mum had us pack all our stuff up and rushed us out of the Highlands.
Suspicions of infidelity are frequently seen in men who kill women. I think when we look at these men, they're often deeply insecure, and even though a woman might have given no indication at all that she might be seeing somebody else, that's frequently an accusation that's thrown at them.
Catherine moved with the children to St Helens in Merseyside to get away from Philip, and it seemed like the fresh start they all needed.
We were really happy there until my mum, it wasn't until my mum met her boyfriend, because at first I thought he was a nice guy. At first she was really, really happy, we all were. We were moving on.
The family settled into their new home, and for a while life was good, until Catherine began a new relationship.
She always needed a man in her life. She would never stay single for long. my grandparents felt that she needed to concentrate on us and herself rather than concentrate on her mum. My mum did the best she could. She was awful depressed most of the time. And one day I came in, I was playing outside, I came in, my mum was in bed. He was drinking cider, sitting in the kitchen, and he was pretty drunk. And he told me that he had some pennies for me, and he took me up to his flat. He gave me some pennies.
According to Sonia, this was the beginning of a prolonged period of time where she became the subject of abuse by her mum's boyfriend.
If he came into the house, if I was eating my dinner, he would put my face in the dish. He'd throw stones at me. He used to shout names. My mum didn't notice it at first, but she noticed the change in me. And she kept asking me what was wrong.
There's a huge myth that children who are being abused know to confide in their nearest and dearest. It simply isn't true. The truth is that Sonia had 2 years of abuse because she would firstly have been thinking about her mother's feelings. Secondly, the potential that she wouldn't be believed. And also, the chances are her abuser would have been telling her a whole host of lies about what would happen if she confided in anyone.
After realising the damage her relationship was inflicting on Sonia, Catherine took the children back to the Highlands and back to their father.
We stayed with my father in Milton, and we stayed there for a week with him. At first it was just me and my sisters and my dad. And then at the end of the week, my mum came to pick us up, and she ended up staying a couple of nights. And that's when they decided that he was going to come down to St Helens with us. She actually pulled us aside, just me and my sisters, and she said, how do you feel about us taking your dad back to St Helens? But I wasn't happy at all. I begged my mum, I goes, no, the same thing's just going to happen again. I goes, you're going to take him down, and he's going to start beating on you again, and I can't take that. I knew that it wasn't going to go anywhere good.
In 1997, Sonia Fraser's mother had been murdered by her father. It was the climax of a childhood that was full of trauma, an experience that would shape her adult life.
When he first went into prison, I wanted him to rot. I did. I hated him. But when he wrote to me and he tried to explain his side of the story, he's a good liar and a good manipulator. He made me believe that it was just a crime of passion, and I just wanted some family. I just wanted a parent. And he was the only one I could... he was the only one that was willing to speak to me.
Philip said that it was a crime of passion. Really what he's trying to get at is that there was a temporary loss of control. But of course we know that's not the case in these circumstances. There'd been a slow build-up of events that precipitated the murder of Catherine. It wasn't a sudden loss of control.
Although Sonia never visited her father in prison, she had begun writing to him when she was 16 years old. And soon after, her battle with addiction began.
When I was 18, actually, when I was 18, I realised I had a problem with alcohol. Most of the time I'd blacked out. I wouldn't remember what happened the night before. I put myself in some dangerous situations.
What's interesting is at the same time that she starts to reconnect with her father, her life starts to spiral further out of control. So that suggests that there is a conflict in her behaviours. She's acting in one way and then she's conflicted with that action, so she needs to escape in another. And I wonder whether the intense guilt that she would have felt would have made her medicate more with addiction.
I was angry. I was angry at the world.
It was at this point Sonia started a relationship with someone who also had addiction issues.
Sonia had already grown up in a family with an abusive father. She'd developed problems with alcohol. She was in a very vulnerable position. Bonds with other people would have felt really important to Sonia. When we're at a low ebb, we rarely make the best decisions for ourselves. Anybody reaching out could have felt like a comfort to Sonia.
While in this new relationship, Sonia's addiction problems got worse. She also fell pregnant.
I just went down. It really just got worse and worse. Life just went to hell, basically. Anyway, I met my daughter's father in 2005, and we moved down to Edinburgh, and I found out I was pregnant with my daughter. So I stopped drinking, and he was supposedly on a methadone programme, keeping himself right.
But it wasn't long before Sonia and her partner caught the attention of the authorities.
About a month after I had my daughter, I found out he'd been using the whole time. And we had social services in our lives. He made me feel he made me believe that what happened between my parents was why we had social services in our lives. I didn't actually find out until we broke up that it was actually down to him because he was using on top of his methadone programme. He made me believe that I was the problem, that my past was the reason why everything was so messed up. It broke me, losing my daughter.
It's hard to break a cycle when you feel worthless. Sonia already feels like a huge failure. And now, she's incapable of being a mother. You can't imagine the impact on somebody's self-esteem. And as much as you can judge their choices that they're making, you can't help in Sonia's case but have a deep sympathy for how she has ended up in this predicament and position.
11 years after her mother's murder, Sonia had hit rock bottom. It was at this point her father re-entered her life.
I didn't actually find out that he was going to be released. I actually found out that he was out of prison. I just got a phone call from my sister. Oh, Dad's out. He wants to see you. That's what I got. She was speaking to him too. She was on speaking terms with him too. In fact, she'd gotten pretty close with him. So I went to meet him. He was so happy. And I gave him a hug, but I just didn't feel right. The whole time I just didn't feel right being around him.
What happens when a person is sentenced to life imprisonment is exactly that. They're never free of the prison system. The 11 years that Philip was sentenced to doesn't mean after that 11 years he's free of the prison system. He is released, but he's on a licence.
I wanted a family. My own family had shut me out of their lives. Like, my grandparents wanted nothing to do with me. My sisters wanted nothing to do with me. It was a really dark time for me then, especially after my daughter being taken from me.
Sonia cautiously began to have contact with her father.
Met up with him a couple of times, and then he told me about Donna, that he met a woman called Donna. And I goes, but Dad, you shouldn't be in a relationship, not while you're out on licence, you're on parole. He goes, I've told my parole officer, and it's not a real relationship anyway, it's not a full-on relationship. We're only talking, maybe holding hands, and maybe a kiss. That's the way he described it to me anyway.
As long as Philip kept appointments with his parole officer and there were no issues in relation to reoffending or coming to the notice of the police, he would have kept a fairly low profile. In reality, 98% of the time the parole officer has no knowledge whatsoever what he's doing. So he may well be reoffending but not getting arrested, drinking but not coming to the notice of the police or the authorities. He may well have relationships with other women, and again, if the probation officer is not there or has no knowledge of it, he's not told of that by Philip, then the likelihood of the parole officer knowing is very, very slim.
At this time, Donna was in her late 20s, the same age Sonia's mother was when she was killed.
When my father wasn't around, I spoke to her and I said to her, I goes, you know what he was in prison for? You know that he murdered my mother? She goes, it was an accident. I goes, I'm not sure if it was an accident. I would like to believe that it's an accident. I'd like to believe it was just a passionate crime, a crime of passion. But I don't know. And I said the same thing to my father. He goes, don't get into a serious relationship because you've just come out of prison after murdering another woman who is exactly like Donna. Donna is her personality and the way that she dressed, the way that she looked, it was sort of the way my mum dressed. She was a beautiful young woman.
Sonia became very concerned as to where her father's relationship with Donna was heading.
I met her a couple of times and begged her to leave my father. I said, look, because I was getting messages at the time. Every time I met a new guy and I'd tell my father about him, I would get messages that I was this, I was that, I was a slag, just like my mum. It was getting quite controlling, I noticed, so I wanted to keep my distance. And I spoke to Donna about it and I said to her, I goes, please, leave him. It was because I've noticed he's getting a bit controlling with me and I'm his daughter. So what's he going to be like with you when you're going out, speaking to your friends, speaking to other men?
When Sonia meets Donna, that's when she starts to question the motives of her father. Has he changed? Because suddenly she's noticing behaviours that he carried out towards her mother, and that activates fear. Because the truth is that Sonia knows how this can end.
I wish I did more. I should have phoned his parole officer. I wish I did more.
After Philip Fraser's release from prison, his daughter Sonia remained in contact with him, despite being concerned about his behaviour. However, it was also around this time that Sonia would meet the man who would help her turn her life around.
I met Deneen in 2008, in end of July, beginning of August 2008. We got together, it lasted for about a month, but I was in a bad way and he knew I needed to get myself sorted out and I was fighting for my daughter and he knew I needed to concentrate on her first. So when he found out I was moving into Milton the year after, he came for me and took me out of Milton, and ever since then we've been together. He's not left my side since then.
Donnie and Sonia now have a son together. To protect the privacy of their new family unit, Donnie has asked not to be shown.
I had a lot of people saying not to go out with her, not because of her dad, but because of drugs and she's got a bad past. But when you like someone and you know you fall for them, that's it. I got her to see a counsellor, and the more she got off her chest privately talking to the counsellor, that's when I started seeing her coming back to herself more and more and more.
It didn't bother him at all that I was the daughter of a murderer. That he knew that Philip had destroyed my life as well as my family's life. I made the mistake of telling my dad that I was pregnant, and he threatened to come through and put a knife through me and Deneen. He actually threatened to come through during the night and just stab us in our sleep. I think he just wanted to control every aspect of my life. I think he wanted to control everything. I realise now my father was a control freak. He is a control freak. He has to be in control. And if something goes out of his control, he loses it.
Unknown to Sonia, her father's new relationship with his girlfriend Donna had come to an end due to his possessive behaviour. Philip Fraser, however, didn't just walk away. He began a campaign of harassment.
Abusive partners can change their ways. It does happen. There are programmes where what we consider low-spectrum offenders can get help. They can seek therapy, have anger management, and to some degree have those underlying issues dealt with. However, how likely are they to engage in that and change? Probably very low. And what we do know is that once somebody is violent in their relationship, the chances are that they will be violent in every single relationship unless they do something pretty significant to change it.
Once the relationship between Philip and Donna had ended, the fact that Philip then continued to stalk her is part of that controlling, of him wanting to being the main person, of actually staying in control of that person. And all it's actually doing is building up that pressure on him once again, as he did in the past, of being unable to control and almost saying, if I can't have control of her, then nobody will have control of her.
On the 11th of April 2010, Philip Fraser broke into Donna's house in Ballintor in Scotland. He attacked and killed the 30-year-old mother with a hammer and a knife in an appalling and barbaric act of violence.
My partner got a phone call from his granny, and she told him what had happened. And when he came off the phone, he said to me, "Sonia, I have to tell you something, but I don't know how you're going to take it."
I was frightened to tell her, but what I'd done is I waited until we had a quiet moment, sat her down, and I just said to her, "Look, your dad's done it again." I couldn't go into details because I didn't want to frighten her too much, and I didn't know, I only knew what I got told over the phone, basically, that he had done the exact same things he'd done to her mother, to a lassie in Ballintor. And to me, it was just the horriblest thing I had to do, to tell someone that, you know.
When Philip killed for the second time, the circumstances were quite similar. The relationship that he was in with a woman, in her mind, had ended, and in his mind, it hadn't. It's hard to know why a man will kill a woman, why a man will kill an intimate partner, why a man will kill somebody that he professed to once love. But it all comes from the same place: the need to be in control, the need to be dominant, the need to demonstrate possession.
Sonia soon discovered the woman her father had murdered was his ex-girlfriend, Donna.
All I could say was that I could have done something, I should have done more. I'm sorry that they had to go through that. I'm sorry that they lost a beautiful woman, a beautiful daughter, a beautiful mother. She was a wonderful woman. She didn't deserve what happened to her. And I'm so sorry for that.
The real travesty in Sonia's story is that she blames herself. The one person who is completely without blame is the child who was brought up in a violent household, abused, and then punished herself the entire time for something that had nothing to do with her actions. Sonia needs to let go of all that guilt, because whilst it exists, it's not hers to hold, and while she holds it, it has the power to damage her. And the truth is that the only person that should damage is Philip. He should be made to feel that damage, not Sonia.
Philip Fraser was sentenced to life in prison for a second time for the murder of Donna Forrest and was ordered to serve a minimum of 20 years before he can be considered for parole.
I hope he never gets released ever again. He's a danger to women. He should never have been released in the first place.
Today, Sonia remains sober and is trying to move on with her life. Her focus lies in creating a safe and stable environment for her own family.
I will tell my son what has happened. He knows that I lost my mother. He knows that my father's in prison. He knows that that he hurt my mother really bad, and that he's hurt another woman really, really bad. But he doesn't know the details. All he knows is that my father is a very bad man that's in prison and that he doesn't ever want to meet. I've written a letter to my father too. I don't want to post it, I don't want to really speak to him at all, but I just wrote everything that I felt about my father down on this letter, and I just put it away. He's not father. He never was a dad. He wasn't a dad to me, he wasn't a dad to my sisters. All he cared about was himself and controlling my mother and controlling that poor young lassie in Ballantyre.
With the discovery of 2 more bodies tonight, the job for Suffolk Police suddenly got a lot bigger. A motorist alerted police this afternoon after he saw a naked woman's body near the road.
In December 2006, police in Ipswich discovered 5 women dead in the Suffolk countryside. The last person to see them alive was ex-cruise ship steward Steve Wright.
I'm told that Steve was responsible for these bodies found locally here, and I still can't believe that he was able to do it or even do it.
This is a huge case. When you get 5 murders in 6 weeks, unprecedented.
There's a sense of disbelief almost that this could be happening in my hometown. No one had seen anything like this before.
His killing spree was frenetic, at times almost unbelievable. This was the moment that Wright's 4th and 5th victims were discovered.
He basically asphyxiated them, either smothered them, strangled them, squeezed the life out of them.
Steve Wright became known as the Suffolk Strangler, a name his father Conrad could never relate to.
He was always a woman lover, not a woman killer. You know, he had 4 or 5 different partners. I mean, I can understand somebody accidentally, perhaps killing one, but not, you know, one every other day.
When somebody's murdered, we think about the family that was affected, you know, these innocent parties who suddenly have their lives ripped apart because a loved one has been taken from them in such a diabolical way and state. But what we often fail to see is that the person who's carried out those crimes are still loved. The impact of knowing that a member of your family is a serial killer is something that essentially breaks the foundations of everything you know, and also means that they are victims as well.
Stephen Wright, he went out, he had 6 weeks, and he just went on a killing spree. One by one, these lovely young women were killed. He targeted them and he took full advantage.
Steve Wright was one of those human beings that blended in perfectly to society. He didn't stand out in any particular way. And that's that kind of reflection that we never really know who we're living amongst. And it's a stark warning to most of us that those people that we think are just ordinary human beings can actually be killers in disguise.
He was very quiet, Very quiet, you can say boat to a ghost, really. He was sitting in my house and showed no indication of me sitting next to someone who'd murdered people.
As a child, Steve Wright travelled the world with his brother, 2 sisters, and his mother, following his father's work in the RAF.
He was a bit of a tomboy, really, a tinker, you might say, you know, always full of life. When I'm done my shift, you was down the beach, because you were always in a hot country anyway, and you spent your time at the beach and the swimming pool, especially in Singapore. And I can see Steve now, he's diving in and out of the water all the time, so much so his nose was becoming skinless, like. He just couldn't keep out of the water. There was never any trouble.
When you're a child, having continuity and kind of a sense of a solid foundation is really important. It's how you form your identity, it's how you form your sense of security. When you have quite a lot of displacement because your parents are moving around because of their jobs, unless you have a really solid relationship with those people, life can feel really uncertain and really insecure, and that can have really far-reaching consequences on your personality and how you develop.
You know, kids, and when there's 4 of them, you got 4 lots of mischief, if you like, although it's never big stuff. They're always together. Playful, I think is probably the better word. There's never any trouble. I had never had to sort of apologise to anybody for them for anything, you know, and that was it.
We know he had perhaps a little bit of an unhappy childhood. His dad was in the RAF and travelled around the world, so there was a fair amount of travelling when he was little. Perhaps never really settled in any one place.
Every weekend, the British families always used to get together, and they had big parties, and all you had to do, you took your bottle along to the house party, and the house you went to done the food. And because we was on the ring, like we had our go at it. The parties, there was possibly too many, you know.
In 1964, the family returned to the UK, but Conrad's relationship with his wife was in trouble.
We got the train from Paddington, I think. I can't remember how we got to Paddington, quite honestly. And they got the train, we were going to get off the train at Ipswich, but we were still having an argument, you know. I'm not coming with you, I want to go and see my mum, I'll take the 2 girls, you take the 2 boys. And I never thought that she would stay on that train. We got off the train in Ipswich, the boys got off, and they was looking, you know, where's mum, you know, and where's the 2 girls? And of course, they went. Kept on the train and went, and I never see her since. Well, he sat and watched his mother go, didn't he? Or stood and watched his mother go. He never got her back. And he was only 8 at the time.
When you think about the stereotypical experience of a child, the idea is that they are with their mother who nurtures and loves them. If she rejects you, the feelings that you are left with is, what was wrong with me? What did I do wrong? What could I have done better? The way that that manifests and grows can distort all the relationships that you have for the rest of your life. It's a primary rejection, it's a primary abandonment, and that's incredibly painful to deal with.
I arrived home with the 2 boys, no wife, no girls, and my mother, I said, where are they? Well, I think they become sort of vacant in a way. They couldn't work it all out, you know, what is going on, you know. After a few weeks, I couldn't handle it. I went and got the girls, and there was no hassle. She didn't want to keep the girls, and I ended up with the 4 of them. With the help of my mother and father, I was able to look after them, and I was still in the RAF.
Conrad soon met another woman, the kids' babysitter, who became his second wife. And as he worked, she became their main parent.
Because Val come along, and very difficult to discipline. If I say discipline, that's a strong word, that, but to keep control, if you like, of 4 children that are not yours. They just trying to crowd her out. You're not a real mum, had too much of that.
These children were in grief. Their lives were being broken down, and they needed a systematic foundation where they felt loved and cared for and compassionately received. And actually, instead, they probably felt like they were a burden, a second thought.
As Steve reached his teenage years, he very quickly began to forge his own life.
Well, I don't suppose I see much of him, did I? As a teenager, really. He worked at a hotel in Aldeburgh. He got a job on the Townsend, Torrens and Ferries. And he must have been a teenager there because he married a young girl from Wales.
Considered a charming man, Steve Wright never had any problems attracting a partner, but the stability he craved eluded him.
He's had 2 wives, and he's had 4 or 5 different lady friends. Well, both the girls he was married to, they stayed here for a few weeks at a time, and there was no argument, you know. There's no sort of raised voices or anything like that. Everybody was happy.
The fact that Wright marries tells us something very symbolic and significant. He's on a search for something. Something is elementally missing in the relationships that he experiences, so he transitions from one to another, hoping it will fix him.
He'd come out at the weekends and he got a job at the bingo hall up in town. But I do believe he when he passes the bookies, he used to take his money in there, and you don't win at that game. In fact, at one time I said, well, when you get your wages, Steve, you bring it to me. And I used to put it in a cupboard upstairs. I said, you can have enough money to, I'm talking to someone who's 30 years plus now. You can have your spend the money, but you're not going to take it all to the bookies.
Wright had a relatively dysfunctional upbringing and obviously had a relationship with his father that was transient at times. They were still connected and close. We know that Wright would go to see Conrad when he was struggling. He would confide in him his troubles, but obviously it never extended to confiding in him about the killings.
He said he'd got a job on the QE2, but that was only for a fortnight. I'm not going. I'm not going to bother with that. I told him to go because, you know, I said, you create a good impression, you get a job.
He's working as a steward, serving first-class customers, and went to some fantastic places. He admitted it in court. He was explaining his use of prostitutes, and he said that started when he was on the QE2 and visiting places like Thailand.
I used to pull in there for 2 or 3 days at a time because they all went ashore. There was a programme on the television at one time, and you could see him sitting at a bar with others, with the local female sort of all over him, you know.
We know that whenever he docked, he would head straight for the brothels. That tells us quite a few things. It shows that he has low boundaries. He's quite happy to push those social norms. The first thing he's thinking of is sex, and also sex in as many different ways as he can get it with as many different people as he can have it with. But secondly, it shows low social responsibility. If you can just get off a ship and go and have sex with different people, you're not really thinking about them as human beings, you're thinking about your need first. And the problem is when you have a mindset that a sexual creature is just an object, well, you can do what you want with them, even dispose of them.
For weeks now, police have been anxious to trace the 2 prostitutes who were friends and were last seen working in Ipswich's red light district, as they wait to see whether they have a double murder on their hands.
A partner and her son in this one house.
He'd been here only a matter of a few months, actually. We were kind of in the heart of what was the red light area, and he used to drive around in his Mondeo and pick women up and took them back here.
The first girl that went missing was Tanya Nicol. Now, her mum reported her immediately. Then Gemma went missing, Gemma Adams went missing. You now have 2 women missing who are both sex workers, you know, on drugs, and they're vulnerable young women.
Steve had been using prostitutes since his visits to Thailand on the QE2. Now it seemed he had a habit closer to home.
The only thing I can come up with, if he was using street workers, if you like, young girls, and then he found himself physically, he couldn't sort of do what he wanted to do because of medical reasons maybe, or, and that threw his mind. And then maybe he kept trying with another girl and still couldn't, and he lost it. Did he ever lose his temper? Or, well, I mean, these were all in 6 weeks. Couldn't believe it. I still feel that something is not really finished.
There's plenty of evidence that they went into the house and that he later dumped the bodies, but it's only supposition, of course, that he did carry out the murders here, and the police have always said that they just don't know where he did do the murders.
The investigating team were investigating 2 missing persons. Although they felt they probably were linked, but they kept them separate so they could cross-search. However, it didn't take too long before the investigating officers realised these cases were linked. And then what subsequently happened, obviously, Gemma was found in the stream, Tanya was found downstream.
There was public appeals. They were carrying out inquiries, house-to-house inquiries, carrying out road checks of cars in the area. It has now become a double murder.
Subsequently, the other 3 women, their bodies were found, and that was a linked series of murders.
A body of a 3rd woman is found in woods at a place called Nacton, again on the outskirts of Ipswich. It turned out to be Annalie Alderton, who'd also been working on the streets, hadn't been reported missing. It was on the same day that Paula Connell was announced missing. By the early evening, there'd been a report come into the police that another woman called Annette Nichols was also missing. Paula Connell was found in woods at the side of the road. Police helicopter went up, and very quickly they identified another body on the ground, and that sadly was the body of Annette Nichols.
The 2 in Nacton Road were laid out in a crucifix position, as they informed everybody else. And again, if you happen to kill somebody willingly or accidentally, you don't, and they think, well, you begin to panic and so I've got to get rid of this body. You then don't take it to a wood to get rid of it and then start laying it out in a certain position. That's something that I can't do. You'd have thought he would just dump the body and run, but no, he didn't.
Stephen Wright chose to position 2 of the women's bodies in the crucifix position. One, probably to try to throw the police off course because the other bodies hadn't been dealt with that way. Secondly, potentially for dramatic effect, because unusually a lot of killers like to leave their work with a certain mark. And most importantly, because there was some thrill at the end of doing that, of creating that, of making that body look a certain way. So he was enjoying his work.
At night, while his partner was working, Steve Wright was cruising the red light district, looking for sex. And this is where he found his victims.
These 5 women, all very vulnerable. They were working to earn money on the streets because they're in the grip of the Class A drug addiction. There's just a feeling that, this guy's got to be caught, who is clearly the same person who's doing it.
Stephen Wright is out there, and under the nose of the investigating team, he's committed more murders. So was he getting a kick? Was he getting off on the fact that I'm murdering while the police are looking for me? We'll never know. But I've never known a case where you have that many murders in such a short space of time. He knew the police were out there. He'd been stopped by the police. Was he enjoying that moment, his moment, when suddenly I'm becoming, you know, quite famous in the media?
Undoubtedly, Stephen Wright sees women as things that he can use for his own pleasure, his own purpose. The fact that he's using prostitutes pretty much on his doorstep means that he has absolutely no respect for his relationship, but also sees women as something that he can use to his own benefit and purpose. He is pushing his boundaries consistently. And the problem with boundaries is if we have a predisposition for doing great harm, there is a point that that boundary snaps. And that's what happens. Steve Boundary gets to a point where the boundary snaps.
I heard on the television, I suppose. When this happened, I never thought anything about Steve. Well, I was just reading about it and just, you know, that much interested in a way, I suppose.
The sad thing about these cases, these 5 women, although they are sex workers, you know, there's someone's daughter, there's someone's sister, there's someone's child, and they were vulnerable, they're at risk. These young women were on those streets, they were addicts, they needed support and they needed help. And sadly, they were vulnerable to the likes of Stephen Wright. He knew they were vulnerable and he took advantage. And we'll never know, unless he tells us, what actually he did and how he lured them and what he did and how he got them on his own.
Well, anybody that does something like this, and 5 bodies in 6 weeks, have got to snap in their head. You know, no control whatsoever. It's not. You can't be a normal person. Something went wrong. But I can't see why he'd done it. What had he got against him?
Detectives have spent the day trying to cast more light into the shadowy world of Ipswich's red light district to try to answer the question, who murdered 5 prostitutes?
In the lush countryside outside Ipswich, Steve Wright was taking advantage of his local knowledge and had disposed of the bodies of women he'd murdered in areas he thought they'd never be found.
I'm told that Steve was responsible for these bodies found locally here, and I still can't believe that he was able to do it or even do it. But it seems as though he was found guilty and that's the end of it.
The murders weren't Steve's first experiences of sexual violence.
A former wife of his gave an interview talking about him being thoroughly abusive right from the point where their relationship started. So there is that side of him, without a doubt.
Wright was not a nice man to be in a relationship with. He was a domestic abuser, he was violent, he was controlling, and this tells us something really important, because if you are able to harm the people in your life that you are meant to protect, what does that suggest about you with a stranger?
We know 3 of Stephen Wright's victims were asphyxiated, so he had his hand around their throat, or was he trying to smother them or block their windpipe? Did the girls die during, you know, the act of sexual intercourse with Stephen Wright, or did they die, you know, because he was strangling them at the same time, or were they strangled after? We'll never absolutely know what happened, because unless Stephen Wright ever tells us, but the facts are quite simple. We know that he strangled 3 girls.
He was called the Suffolk Strangler. I suppose it's a headline writers coined that sort of name, and I think it stuck.
This violent side of Steve was not something that his father saw.
He's had 2 wives, and he's had 4 or 5 different lady friends, if you like, and not one of them said anything detrimental about him, you know? No one complained. If he was violent or argumentative or whatever, surely one of them would say to me, you know, can you have a word with Steve or whatever? No. It's not just one person, there's 5 or 6 of them.
The fact that Conrad struggles with believing that his son was capable of murder isn't unusual. It's a sense of cognitive dissonance. You can't have 2 conflicting beliefs at the same time. You can't say to yourself, my son is a hateful, psychopathic, torturous murderer, and I love my son, he's a great guy. It just doesn't work.
He was all right at the weekends and coming out with me. Cricket, we used to do cricket, and we have a cricket tea and have a drink after the match. I'm led to believe those 2 he's led a double life, but I can't believe it because I was with him so many times.
After his marriages ended, Steve drifted in and out of relationships and work, often ending up back at his dad's home whenever he was in trouble.
Well, this is where Steve used to bed down when he was here. And he'd sometimes come to bed very early, and this is where he kept. Done what he wanted to do, and no one sort of was checking on him to see what he was at. In fact, we thought he was, you know, he'd got a home here whenever he wanted it.
I think it's interesting that Stephen Wright went on from being a quiet introvert, you know, apparently quiet individual who didn't bother with many people. However, there was 2 sides to this guy. I'm sure his dad didn't know that he was, you know, frequently using sex workers. And I'm sure when his wife was at work all night, she didn't know while she's at work he's having sex with young women. Although he's a loner and he was quiet, he clearly was someone who had a very, very dual personality, very strange.
I know he did try to commit suicide once. I got a call 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning when I was on nights to say that my son had been found in a car, his girlfriend's car, with a hose, and he was taken to Peterborough Hospital, where I went. And I can remember saying something like, "What did you do that for, boy?" And I don't know whether I got an answer from him, I can't remember.
Stephen Wright has a level of self-loathing. There is absolutely some kind of conscience there. He's a man who has felt so unhappy that he's wanted to kill himself. When things go wrong for Stephen Wright, there is some kind of extreme reaction, whether that's trying to commit suicide, whether that's going out and gambling lots of money, whether it's having sex with prostitutes. We know that he can't cope in a cogent way. He finds usually a negative behaviour pattern to deal with his self-pain and self-hate.
Another dramatic event occurred when Steve's mother reappeared in Ipswich, the first time he'd seen her since he was 8.
With his sister getting married 30 years later, his mother then come from America. They arranged it somehow, and she wanted to visit the children, and she went to see Steve at a pub in Plumstead, I believe it was, and he didn't like it. He says, "Why now, after 30 years?" And I think if his head or mind did change, I think the shock of that was probably what set him off.
The fact that Conrad thinks that Patricia walking into the pub that Stephen Wright worked at and connecting with him again could have made him so angry that he chose to go out on murder just does not make sense. Stephen Wright had an opportunity to reclaim his relationship with what was his initial primary caregiver, and he chose not to. So there was something in his psyche saying that he had made a choice that she was not required in his life. And that could suggest that he has resentment and bitterness and hostility that he knows would play into that relationship with his mother if he sustained it. So it was better to reject.
In Ipswich, concerned the man now dubbed the Suffolk Strangler would strike again, police quickly made an arrest for the murders of the women. But it was not Steve Wright.
The police would have been looking at a number of lines of inquiries around people who went with sex workers.
They'd arrested a guy on suspicion of all 5 murders. He was a guy who frequented the red light area, befriended a lot of the women who were working there. A lot of them had been to his house.
However, the police had managed to recover DNA from 3 of the victims.
From the 1st of November, when Tanya was reported missing, to the 15th of December, when the 5 murders got linked, the police then managed to fast-track DNA, the forensic evidence.
Steve Wright's DNA was already in the police DNA database at this point.
He had been working in a hotel in Felixstowe some years previously and had, I think, stolen some money from the till. It was a matter of £80 or so. But he was caught and he was arrested, and as a result his DNA was taken. That meant it was on the police records. So when they recovered DNA from the 3 victims found on dry land, they were able to compare it to the national database, and hey presto, it was Steve Wright.
Police arrived before dawn to make a second arrest in 2 days. Stephen Wright was taken from his home. Shortly afterwards, both the house and road were sealed off.
Well, I got a knock on the door from a male and a female from one of the reporters in the national paper, and they told me your son has been arrested for the Ipswich murders. I couldn't believe it.
On the 19th of December 2006, Stephen Wright was arrested in his home and charged with the murders of 5 women.
I just can't fathom out at all how he's capable of doing that. But the thing is, there's not been any more, has there? Once he's locked up, there ain't no more.
Steve's DNA had matched that found at the crime scenes.
As soon as they got that fast-track DNA through, they knew it was him, they pieced it all together, and they charged him on the 21st of December. And I think everyone in Suffolk and across the country felt, what a relief. And for those people in Suffolk, thank goodness someone was locked up for it, because people were frightened to go out. It was leading up to Christmas, you know, festivities, parties, and everyone was worried. You don't want to be out on the street. You know, it's really, really worrying. So, great piece of police work.
Neighbours were very surprised. People didn't know him that well. He'd only been here a few months. I think one chap told me that he spent a lot of the time cleaning his car, and that was about it.
But the police were convinced Steve was their killer and visited the home that, over the years, Conrad had shared with his son.
Yeah, they turned up, they said, can we have a look in your garage? I said, well, you can, but there's nothing in it, it's empty. And when I come out, the son and the mirror were struggling to get to me first because they thought I had things to say. Well, I hadn't got nothing in it. And they were pushing and shoving, and I piled into them in the end.
On the 22nd of December, Stephen Wright attended Ipswich Magistrates Court.
Steve Wright was very quickly charged with 5 counts of murder. The Crown Prosecution Service talked to the police and very quickly decided that there was enough evidence to charge him. There's a packed courtroom. I think they had to arrange 70 seats for journalists. And Steve Wright came in, and I always remember he almost had a sort of quizzical kind of look on his face. At this stage, nobody knew the extent of the evidence that there was against Steve Wright. You know, there's no end of forensic evidence. There was DNA, there was fibres of his clothing found on bodies, fibres from his house found on bodies, DNA from the girl's blood, some of the victims found on his clothing. None of that. Nobody knew any of this at that stage.
He finally faced trial on the 16th of January 2008 at Ipswich Crown Court.
Well, I went to court every day, and we got there. We were first to arrive, actually. My son took me, and then I saw the families arrive. And I said, well, I can't sit with them, you know, and because initially when it all started, they were crying and all sorts. And I sat in another room, and the press were in there as well, sat as close to the front as I could.
The trial was long awaited. It was some 14 months or so after the murders, a huge amount of interest. Naturally, all the families of the victims wanted to see justice done for their loved ones. So it's a big moment for them as well. This was the first time that they got to see Steve Wright in the flesh and hear the evidence against him.
I did see him once when he got up before the actual case. He was brought into the court, and I stood up, and he came. He was in a glassed-off area, and I think now that he looked, and he saw me, but that was all, you know, and he just went. And I thought when I come out, well, at least he knows I was there.
Well, I felt the evidence was pretty overwhelming. There was his DNA was on the bodies of the 3 women who were found on dry land, and there was forensic evidence in the form of clothing fibres from his clothes, and those same fibres were also found on the bodies of the women. I remember Tanya Nicole. Her body had been in water for some 6 weeks or so, but the police still recovered quite a large, about a 5mm long fibre caught up in her hair. There was about over 170 individual pieces of forensic evidence.
The police got him on his DNA, and when he was being questioned in court, every answer was no comment, no comment.
The jury convicted him in about 6 hours. I mean, this is 5 murders. But that just shows you the evidence was overwhelming, compelling evidence. DNA was a golden nugget, but combined with all the other forensic evidence, particularly on Tanya Nicol, that fibre in her hair, that had come from the footwell of his car. He was done.
I think the families there was sort of some gasps of relief that justice was being done. But no reaction from Steve Wright in the dock. I looked at him, he looked down, still that same pretty blank expression.
The jury come in and find him guilty, and that's the end of it. There's no follow-up, you know, not to my mind anyway.
Not long after the court case, Conrad went to visit Steve in jail.
At Belmarsh, I had to book in because I had an appointment, and I had to empty all my pockets. And so I'd got nothing when I went into the sort of waiting room to be called. And I sat in the waiting room, and there was other people there, women with kids. But I looked around, and I think felt I was the only one with a suit on, you know. And then I got called in to do my searching, like, and I had to take my jacket off and lift your arms up, and then you stand in a little square, and they bring the dogs in and sniff all around you, thinking I'm taking drugs in, I suppose, you know. But I went through that, and I was thinking at the time that I ain't coming here anymore. But then it was all for nothing anyway, because according to one of the officers, they wouldn't see me. He said, "Your son won't see you. There's nothing we can do about it."
The fact that Wright won't see his father in prison is absolutely telling. He knows that he committed those murders. And he knows that Conrad, as much as he tries to think about his innocence, understands really somewhere that that's the case. Confronting who he really is with someone who really never knew him, but that he loved, is something that emotionally he just can't deal with. It's as simple as that. It's cowardice.
Steve did make one attempt to get in touch with his dad.
I got a letter from him once to say that he believed I was the only one that believed he was innocent and stuff like that. Now, why would he say things like that to me? Well, I got rid of it, and at this moment in time, today, I wish I'd have kept it. But I had to get rid of it in the end because it was sort of upset me in a way. I used to keep getting out and looking, getting nowhere, and I thought, well, everything, all these photographs went, got to clear it up. He wasn't crying out for help. And he seemed to be quite happy taking the punishment that had been dished out to him. He knows where I am because I'm in the same house, and you would think, you know, decently he would write to his dad and say, well, look, Dad, I done this and I done that and I'm sorry and things like that, but not even that. Nothing. I think I've really got accustomed to it.
I think that Stephen Wright is one of the most dangerous types of human being, and I think that having a relationship with him would be challenging for anyone. But I also think there is some synergy between Conrad and him that is unresolved and needs to be resolved, and maybe building a relationship of some sorts would help them both.
I don't know why I'm worrying and thinking about Steve, quite honestly. We should be thinking about the girls involved and their families.
Conrad's biggest struggle is that somewhere in him he still loves his son, he still cares for him, and to some degree it's important that at some point he realises that that's okay. It's okay for us to love the part of the human being that we knew. We can reject the part of that human being that did harm, but there is nothing wrong with still loving somebody who did horrible things. And making peace with that is really important because it's not your guilt to carry, it's theirs.
I think must be a very difficult thing for any parent to think or to realise my son is a serial killer and is responsible for the deaths of 5 innocent women. The evidence is there that he did kill those women, murder them.
I don't think we'll ever know unless Stephen Wright one day decides that he wants to talk, or maybe a member of the family will get him to talk, or maybe his dad will go and visit him. I've got to say, if it was my child, I think I'd want to go and find out and say, why did you do it? What caused you to do it?
Maybe I should write a letter and see whether the prison governor would pass it on to him. That might be a challenge for me to see whether, in fact, I got an answer. If I can find out that prison, that's what I'll do. I'll write a letter to him and see whether I get an answer.
năng dễ bắt hơn là để vâng. Không để không công khai. Cái lên để không công khai thì nó không công khai nó bắt mình dễ bắt. Nó bắt không? Nó bắt mình để bản nháp nó bắt ít được. Cái của mình kiểu công khai nó mới bắt. Đúng rồi thì mình chỉ để không công khai trước đi. Vì khi mà mình test thì mình chỉ để thì mình cắt hết đi thì mình tải về thì nào thì đỡ đi. Giờ khi tải lên kênh nào mà thì cắt đi để cái test nó tiếp bắt. Bạn để không công khai mình để đâu bắt mình 2 ngày là tầm 1-2 ngày bắt hết không công khai. Kể cả kênh test thì bạn riêng tư không công khai nó luôn cũng được. Thì cả bắt. Nhưng mà đôi khi một tập tôi không bắt đâu, 2 tập 3 tập tôi bắt nhiều nhỉ. Bắt thêm ấy. Nó bảo nó bắt thêm.